Welcome to the distinguished lecture on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the School of Engineering. My name is Tokumbo Ogunfumi, and I work here as a professor of electrical and computer engineering. I also serve as one of the associate deans for mission, culture, and inclusion. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this fourth edition of our quarterly lecture series. The house rules, first of all, please mute your phones, and then the bathrooms are down the hallway on the left, I believe. And this lecture is being recorded for later broadcast on YouTube channel. At the end of the lecture, we'll have a reception right outside this doors. So thank you for joining us. Let me say a few words about this series of lectures. Good. The Distinguished Lecture Series is a new lecture series endowed by the SCU Dean of School of Engineering, Dr. Alleyne. And this is as part of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Initiative at Clara University. The goal of the program is to invite successful, distinguished, underrepresented minorities in STEM and we'll make them as role models to come and give us a university-wide lecture. The lecture is accessible to anybody affiliated with the university. And again, it could be a technical seminar or in conjunction with technical seminar, also talk about DEI issues. I just want to give you a rundown of the speakers in the past. Our inaugural speaker was Chancellor Gary May from UC Davis, and that was during the pandemic. So it was an online, there was a lot during the lockdown, so it was an online event. And the lecture is recorded, it's also available on YouTube. After that, we had Joanne Wilson, who is the Deputy Director of the ITU Radio Communication Bureau in Geneva, and she gave a very interesting talk. Actually, two talks. She gave us a technical talk as well as the distinguished lecture. And then in February, we had the provost of the Catholic University of America. He's also a professor of physics, Aaron Dominguez. And it was a very interesting lecture on particle physics and the STEM workforce. That is also available on our YouTube channel. And today we are very excited to have Alleyne, who is the Dean of the College of Science and Engineering at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. He's also a professor of mechanical and electrical engineering as well. He will be giving today's lecture. His title is DEI as a Competitive Advantage in STEM Research. I will introduce him much later. Before I do, I want to alert you to our next event. It will be on January 26, 2023, Thursday at about 4 p.m. We already have a speaker lined up, and we're just trying to finalize the arrangement for that. So please mark your calendars. This is the program that we have today. After my introduction, welcome and introduction, I will hand over to the Dean, and she would welcome the speaker and welcome you all to this event. And then we will have about 45 minutes of lecture from the distinguished lecturer. After that, we'll have some time for question and answers. And then we'll have some closing remarks from me. And then we'll have a reception right outside this house. We know that there are some people who are watching us online. They are also invited to send us questions by chat. We're monitoring that. Before I introduce the speaker, I would like to have the Dean come and welcome.
So I'd like to welcome everyone here and welcome our guests. It's a pleasure to have you here. We've already discovered that we have mutual connections that we have known throughout the time. This is fourth?
Fourth one.
Fourth a really fine event, and I want to thank Professor Ogunfumi for putting these together. We've been able to bring people from a wide variety of backgrounds throughout the country to do these events, and we hope to continue that. So with that, I will turn it back over and allow you to welcome our guests.
Thank you very much. So I have a bio here that I'm going to read. Please pardon me for that. But before I read the bio, the topic is very exciting and interesting to me. We know that DEI is important in many industries, but I never thought of it as a competitive advantage in STEM research. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about how, as a researcher, I can use DEI to enhance my research.
You see Katrina? I don't know. I don't see her.
So we're excited to have Dr. Andrew Alleyne as our fourth distinguished lecturer here in this series of lectures. He received his BS in Mechanical and Aerospace from Engineering from Princeton University in 1989, and the MS and PhD degrees in Mechanical Engineering from the University of California at Berkeley in 92 and 94 respectively. Currently, he's the Dean of the College of Science and Engineering at the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities. He also holds the title of Russell and Elizabeth Bennett Chair. Prior to joining Minnesota, he was a faculty member for nearly 30 years in the Mechanical and Electrical Engineering departments at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where he held the Ralph and Catherine Fisher Professor of Engineering. He's a fellow of the IEEE, ASME, and AAAS, and he was also a Fulbright Fellow to the Netherlands, where he held a visiting professorship at TU Delft. His research background encompasses modeling, simulation, and implementation of control systems for complex systems and nonlinear systems. His academic record includes supervision of over 80 MS and PhD students and over 400 conference and journal publications. That's a lot of publications. His basic research efforts have been applied and commercialized with patents and 2 separate software tools licensed to industry and transitioned to the Department of Defense. He has also been active in external advisory boards for universities, industry, and government, including the US Air Force, the Army, the Department of Energy. He has been a very strong advocate for diversifying academia and has received the Society of Women Engineers Advocating Women in Engineering Award, as well as the University of Illinois Laring Cowan Award for teaching and mentoring in diversity. In addition to research and service, he has a keen interest in education and earned the UIUC College of Engineering Teaching Excellence Award. He also earned the UIUC Campus Award for Excellence in Undergraduate Education and the UIUC Campus Award for Excellence in Graduate Student Mentoring. So you can see that he comes with a lot of awards in the areas we care about at Santa Clara University. Dean Alleyne will tell us his own career trajectory, what lessons he has learned, and how we at Santa Clara can attract, mentor, and retain underrepresented groups in STEM fields of science, technology, engineering, and math, so we can promote greater diversity in STEM. So we're very delighted to have him here today. Please join me in welcoming Dean Alleyne.
Thank you for that very kind introduction. And I'm gonna have to share this screen here. Share that. And we'll go ahead and start it on up. And so I'm delighted to be here. You heard the introduction, it was far too long. I apologize. But I have been very, very fortunate to find a career that has me doing what I like to do for a job, so it made it actually relatively easy. What I want to do today is give a little background and think about the first 3 bullets there as sort of the why we want to do this, right? The why is actually usually the most important question. After the why, it's a little bit of the what and how you do things. Thinking about it mostly from a faculty member or an organization that's leading a research group, or an organizational leader that's leading a set of other folks. And there's some tools that I had. That's a little toolbox there to go through that. And then we'll wrap up with some conclusions and discussion. It's important to understand again. So what do they say? And where you stand often depends on where you sit. So why am I interested in diversity and inclusivity. It's important to understand the background. So I grew up until high school, little island off the Florida coast, past Cuba, Jamaica. If you are familiar with Jamaica, one of the things that you'll know is our motto here, which is out of many, one people. So it's on our crest, on our coat of arms. You'll see it on our money, just like in the US, you'd have E pluribus unum or something like that. And that means something. It means that, you know, people from Jamaica come from all over the world, courtesy of the British monarchy. You know, the British Empire spanned the globe, and they'd bring people from all over the place to produce the sugar, mostly in the Caribbean, that they'd go ahead and use for other things. So when I was growing up, this wide range of backgrounds, you know, you can, I'll see if I move this up here. This is what my family looked like. Okay? And there were people from all over. There's my crazy Dutch uncle. There's my uncle from Pakistan. You know, people from all different types of backgrounds, Chinese, Scottish, the list went on and on. And for those who are wondering where I am, that's me right there. Looking really sporty with that vest. So in addition to this range of backgrounds, you know, there's a really strong thread of education and achievement. In our family, education was just beat into us from a very young age. And we have multiple degrees, MDs, PhDs, Masters of Fine Arts, MS. Within academia, we've got multiple Rhodes Scholars in the family. People that have been heads of university departments. It's not like we grew up with a silver spoon in our mouths, or my parents didn't. You know, this is where my mom grew up. It's in the country, in Jamaica, in Westmoreland. It's to the east. There was no indoor water. There was no indoor bathroom. If you were to see this, you would say that they came from very modest means. Yet, she grew up to be head of her department at Howard University in Human Development and Family Studies. Had chancellors, vice chancellors, others that have done very, very well in other aspects of business, law, commerce, finance. And so from the get-go, excellence and a diverse, inclusive environment were not separate. It was not either or. You know, you have this dichotomy people talk about, well, we can't have diversity and excellence, we'll give up quality, right? And it becomes this false dichotomy that it's one or the other, you gotta choose. Growing up, I knew that was not true. As a matter of fact, it's expected to have both from a very, very young age. And I've carried that through with me sort of the rest of my life. So that's sort of a background, you know. Got one grandfather that grew up in Guangzhou, China, another one that grew up in parts of Scotland, another one grew up in, you know, rural Barbados, from all over, but they all said you can still be excellent. So how did that translate to my own life? I'll sort of skip the part until I actually started the job and just start with there. I started as a professor in 1994, straight out of grad school. Left the Bay Area here and went over to Illinois. And my teaching and research area is in control systems. What we do is we come up with algorithms that you use to make decisions. It's really the art and science of decision making. It involves a lot of understanding the systems that you're dealing with. That's a dynamics. You got to have a fair bit of math background that allows you to come up with the algorithms. Got to be pretty good at modeling the simulation. And what we do a lot is we do a lot of testing in V&V. And the way I'd organized my research program, it's kind of a combination. It's a matrix type of organization. I like to keep this mental image in mind, where you have sort of tool development, which are sort of the algorithms, and then where you apply them, how you impact society. And so for the purpose of this talk, the particular tools that we would develop, unless this is a controls audience, I'll skip over those, but you can see that, you know, we also try to align ourselves with things that sort of mattered in terms of manufacturing, energy, mobility, transport, things like that. And I didn't quite figure out how to do that. Oh, there you go. You can kind of see some of the things that we did up here. This one was pretty cool. Turns out like everybody needs to eat, and so building big robotic tractors. This is a self-driving tractor, and this was a really nifty combine that goes through the field that keeps the header height at a certain level. Those are pretty neat things to work on. Worked a lot on other types of manufacturing aspects, all sorts of transportation aspects, energy aspects, both stationary and a lot on the mobile side. Published a lot of papers, as you said, and you know, had a lot of fun doing it. I think that's one of the things that most liked about the job, the people that I was working with. Worked with some awesome students and collaborators from academia, government, and industry, and it was never really work per se. It was effort, but it wasn't drudgery. And these are sort of the people that we worked with. And you know, this was great at the start of my career. I had a lot of fun. I owe a lot to the folks that are here. But I harken back to when I was growing up and this idea of diversity and inclusivity, even though at that point in time it wasn't really a term, it didn't really exist. DEI wasn't a term. But I'd always heard that, you know, having this type of multicultural, diverse background and excellence brought a lot to the table. I read some literature about the fact that you can actually do better with a diverse, well-managed team, and the key there is well-managed in addition to the diverse. If it's just diverse and not well-managed, it's hard. And we can go into sort of details about that. But you know, I figured I'd try and run an experiment after tenure. I waited until I got tenure before I ran the experiment. And I said, look, you know, are there some lessons I learned growing up that I could apply to my own workplace? The inclusivity and diversity really buy me anything more than I already had. Things were going well. Could they go better? Okay. As somebody that's an experimentalist, there's a saying that you have. You know, you always believe your own data more so than you believe the stuff you read in the journals, because you know, you never know what they're doing to their own data, but when you actually took it yourself and you have confidence in it, you tend to believe that a lot more, right? And so I decided to form a hypothesis and test it. I said, what happens if we change the makeup of the research group that we operate, okay? And you can see before around 2003, you know, God bless her, there's Marina. She sort of toughed it out with a bunch of guys. We've laughed about it since, but it was not the best experience for her, she will admit. And after that I said, well, you know, we're gonna go ahead and balance this out and go for a little bit more sort of gender parity if we can. Lo and behold, right, you know, you can measure how many papers you publish. My paper count went up by about 50%. If I look from, and there is no y-axis intentionally, but if you sort of look on the average up until that point and the average after that point, there's a significant difference. I mean, it goes up and down because, particularly if you're an experimentalist, you know, it takes a while and you get clumps of papers out at the same time. The interesting thing too is I actually had a higher citation count in this period after we did that transition. This is about where we did the transition, right? Got tenure around here, okay? It took me a couple years to go ahead and get the group set up the way I wanted it, and then you had to wait a while for the papers to actually come out. The citation count I wasn't expecting. I had a hint that the productivity would go up, but this was a bonus. And it was because we had better internal, external communication of ideas. We had better communication ideas within our research group, and we also had better links to other research groups across the, not just the university, across the actually world, to be honest, and a much better sense of research community and cohesiveness. I'll give you an example of what I mean. The kinds of papers that I would publish before I did this, it'd be like me and one student. That's the upper one. You know, it's myself and Ray. Afterwards, we ended up getting papers that would be more like, you know, 7 or 8 authors on there, okay? And each one brought a different aspect to it. I was the machines and controls guy. You know, Mike Strano and John Rogers, they were sort of the materials people. Placid Ferreira here, and was more the manufacturing person. John was a fluid mechanics. And with that, we created a really nifty, novel fabrication device for additive manufacturing that has scaled and sort of laid the foundation for a field, which is awesome. And I couldn't have done that with just my own research group. So, this increase in productivity, so you get more out, and you get better product out, okay? Why wouldn't you want to do this? It was really interesting when I started to present this and show some of my colleagues. Many of them were skeptical. Many of them said, I don't know if I could do that. I started to realize, holy cow, if I do this and they don't, remember that 50%?
Yes.
Right? I'm gaining on them. So it's okay if you don't go ahead and do sort of the diverse, inclusive environment. At the end of the year, when it comes to set raises, well, guess who's going to get the higher raise? And it's purely objective, because they look at your productivity. Okay? And that was sort of when the light bulb went off. That this wasn't just a moral imperative. This is like in my selfish interest. Okay? The question then becomes, does it scale? Right? What worked with 10, 15 graduate students, could you do that for an organization, a larger organization? And so, one of the things I had the good fortune of running an engineering research center before I had my current gig, and that is roughly 25 faculty, maybe 100 students and postdocs. Base budget from NSF is about $4 million a year. It's a 10-year effort. A bunch of different government organizations and companies. And I wondered for this engineering research center, which was focused on basically power density. You've seen more electric cars. The idea of more electricity, it is not just confined to cars. It cuts across all aspects of mobility. You're seeing e-bikes now, e-scooters. Your airplanes, they've got about, modern airplanes, 787's got about 1.1 megawatts of power running through it. It's significant. Electrification, and I can give you a whole spiel on why that was important. But we were bringing in, remember how I showed that paper that had like the fluid mechanics person and the materials person, and right? We're going to bring a lot of disciplines together, and they actually had to interact. So I was like, okay, can we use inclusivity as a core aspect of this management? Because this was very, very disparate, right? You had people that did materials. We had a bunch of material scientists in here. Here's a really cool one. You can actually change the thermal conductivity of your polymers by aligning the polymer structures through various different means. One was like lithiation that you could do, which was pretty cool. And then you had to try and integrate that into power devices. Right? So here you got your material scientists that have to work with the electrical engineers, right? That have to then coordinate with the mechanical engineers who are building the heat sinks. Right? Then have to deal with the controls and systems people who are trying to put this all together and figure out a systems design. It was a complex, and the center's still running, is a complex effort. One of the things I realized relatively early on, is that there's more and more electrification. Again, I can give you a whole 20-minute spiel on that. But the biggest limit I found was that electrical systems, they're limited thermally, right? Because they have resistance to them. You put as much power as you want into them. If you don't figure out a way to get the heat out, it's going to become a fuse really quickly. Right? It's much easier to put thermal energy into a volume than it is to take it out. And when you start to do this mobile electrification, each field approached it from their own perspective. I don't know if you've ever seen this cartoon. It's one of my favorite ones of like the blind people and the elephant. They each touch a different piece of the elephant and they think it's something completely different. The person that is at the back end thinks I'm holding a rope that's attached to something, and the person that touches the side thinks it's a wall. It's only if you take off the blindfold, look at the overall system, you realize it's an elephant. Okay, and that's what we were trying to do with the center. Right? We couldn't go ahead and get more efficient power electronics. Why? You're just going to run them harder, right? And you're going to run into the same thermal barriers. You couldn't say, okay, I need a thermal conductivity X, right? Why? You're just going to use it up by cramming as much power into so you had to balance everything and do a systems approach. My hypothesis was an inclusive and equitable environment was a necessary condition. Why you had to hear each other. Right? You couldn't just say, well, why can't you just make the heat sink more efficient? You had to sort of understand the constraints that the mechanical engineer was operating under as you're doing your design, your electrical design, right? And maybe you take a hit on your electrical design and spread it out a little bit to give more area so that the thermal people actually got a shot at removing all that heat. And you're not gonna do that if you're just pointing fingers at each other. You needed to have that inclusive environment, right? So, again, we're an engineer, a bunch of engineers, went about doing it in a relatively formal way. We used surveys as a particular tool and as a management tool to sort of pinpoint across all the institutions and the different research groups along a multiple markers of inclusivity. All right, what is working well and what isn't. We'd sort of have a threshold that we would set, and if you start to fall below the threshold, okay, that's where we got to pay attention to. Right? What the result was, and we then take corrective actions, and they're very tangible. A very highly functional center, lots of collaborations. We had lots of papers going back and forth between Howard University and Stanford, or between Illinois and Arkansas and Howard. We were kind of sort of, I hate to admit it because it's being recorded, kind of like a poster child for the centers program. One of the downsides of that is everybody just sort of figured, well, they're running fine, we'll just leave them alone. And we're like, no, pay attention to us too, over there in DC. One of the really cool things is that, remember how I was talking about like that 50% jump in publication rate? Well, lo and behold, because we built that inclusive environment and everybody could actually work well together, many of these ERCs, without going to the details, they take the NSF money and they spend it, okay? We formed teams, right? Teams that were unique, right? Teams that could actually work well together. We're like the warriors of the Golden State Warriors of doing engineering research, and we were able, because we played well together as a team, and we could do it better than anybody else. So guess what? When we actually started responding to other solicitations and other government funding calls, we could outcompete anybody else that was going after them. And you take a look at, I think this was year 6. Our total, we spent money on education programs and administration. The total amount that we spent on research from our base budget was about $2.7 million. Okay, if you add up, right, what we're spending on our industry funds and the associated projects, these are the things we can go out and go after based on the teams we've formed. It's like $4 million. Not quite 50% more, but we're getting there. Year 7, I think we're actually bigger, just because people are like, holy cow, you can do what we can. The reason why I had to take a break and talk to that ARPA-E program manager, that was the largest ARPA-E. They have an open call that they do, which is just give us your craziest ideas. ARPA-E, it's like an energy ARPA. It's a $4 to $5 million project. We got it, the largest one that they had. It's a crazy concept for a motor. All right. The program manager said, the way you folks do things at Poets, right, gave me confidence that you could pull off what everybody else says is impossible. Right. That's the competitive advantage. Because we build this team that's inclusive, that's $4.5 million. Right? Other people can't do that. Now I ask the question, okay, I could do it at order 10 to the 1, and I saw benefits, my own research group. I could do it at order 10 to the 2, and we saw benefits, right? Increase in funding above our base. Can you do it at order 10 to the 3 and 10 to the 4, like 1,000 people, or 10,000 people? That'd be pretty cool, right? So that's one of the things we're doing now. New role at Minnesota, along with a lot of other things you do as a dean. We have a new experiment now. Called it, the launch was Mission Inclusion, and I hope I don't get sued by Mission Impossible. It's supposed to be the little Mission Impossible logo there, to see how we could create tools and processes. And I'll skip because we're running out of time just a little bit. This is our plan, a skeleton of it. I can tell you more about it if you want to. But there are 10 elements of this process flow, and a controls engineer will realize a feedback loop when they see it. And there's actually 2 on 2 different timescales, where we're going through element by element and turning this into a process. And as we are successful in this, okay, I believe it's going to allow us to outcompete in terms of recruiting faculty. We're going to outcompete in terms of retaining our faculty, because who's going to go to an environment that they don't want to be a part of? We're going to get better research ideas, better student outcomes. If students are actually part of this process and they understand what this can do for them in terms of being in an inclusive environment, not just being in it, but actually actively participating in it. Okay? And by actively participating, this is a key part, right? A lot of people think like the DEI and the diversity stuff is just the underrepresented people's job, right? No. The average majority person, if they're able to capitalize on this and pull people into their teams and get the most out of a wide range of ideas, they can start to manage teams over in Pakistan. They can start to manage teams in Brazil. So guess who is going to get tagged for promotion, right? Them. And I've had a lot of discussion with some of my, on that mission inclusion thing, there were 2 CTOs, one from Medtronic and one from Cargill. Cargill is like the largest privately held kind of firm in the country. These people know what they're talking about in terms of how people get promoted. And they're like, if you can do this, it matters so much more than grades, right? Nobody's ever asked them what their grades were in college when they're CTO. They have asked them, to get to that position, how do you go ahead and pull together disparate teams spread out across an organization? And being able to do this kind of stuff is where it's at, right? For this, if there are any undergrads in here or students, I can guarantee you that it's going to matter more than grades. Your ability not just to be part of an inclusive environment, but to create one and be able to pull people in that are not like you and don't necessarily think like you. And you're not doing it to be touchy-feely, hold hands, sing kumbaya. No. It's great if you do. It's not about a moral imperative. This is how you get ahead. This is how you put bread on the table. This is how you avoid being part of the downsizing when the recession hits. You become critical to the company. Right? It is a straight-up competitive play. Right? So hopefully I've convinced you that in technical organizations, you can actually achieve a competitive advantage by paying attention to these types of aspects. Because you're going to get, particularly in a knowledge-driven type of economy, right? That is what we mostly are going to be working in, ideas. We're not out there, working in the fields. Most of what we do is knowledge-based. So you're going to be leading teams of knowledge-based employees. In that setting, being able to harness the inclusivity piece, critical for your success. Given that, I want to switch a little bit and talk about some tools that you can put in your toolbox if you believe me. Okay? First thing is building that inclusive culture. I think this is the first thing when you start to, a lot of people say DEI, you get the representation first, right? And then you make sure everything's fair, and then you sort of talk about being inclusive. That's actually kind of backwards, right? Because, the reason why you're talking about that is because you may not have a diverse environment. And so you may not be able to change the people that you have right now. I guarantee if you wanted to get like a third of your faculty to be underrepresented, you'd have a really hard time. But you can change the minds of the ones that are currently here, right? And that's why, I forget who I was talking about earlier, but I've always said I pick the fights I think I can win. I don't pick a fight I don't think I can win, right? I think I can win on the inclusivity first, faster than I can win on the diversity, okay? So most of the challenges for underrepresented members, particularly research communities, they feel they're not heard. Anybody ever been in a room where they sort of feel like just being talked over? And they'll have, there you go, right? And when you feel you're not heard, you're not valued. You're not part of this group. I don't feel included. I can't contribute. And some of the messages that people that usually don't they don't mean to do it, right? But they do it anyway. And it's really subtle. But if you hear it over and over again, you sort of think, well, maybe I'm not supposed to be here. Right? Maybe this isn't for me. It's for somebody else. It's not for me. And for those of you who don't do this, doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. My favorite stories, multiple times. I am like the chair of my section ASME, or I'm, without sounding obnoxiously arrogant, I kind of know what I'm doing, and I'm, kind of, I deserve to be here. Multiple times at conferences, people are asking me, hey, so, do you think you can move the chairs? Like I'm the staff person at the conference? Yeah, no lie. Even people in my own field. And I say that in jest. If I didn't have the background that I came from, right, I might think, well, heck, maybe I actually don't belong here, right? But for me, I'm like, that's you're just being an idiot. Yeah, that's your problem. Why don't you come see my talk at 4? If you're going to build that inclusive culture, the biggest thing you can do is communicate. That's the most important thing. Communication. Can't stress this. As a leader, you're going to have to stress that everybody's input is valued, and do it over and over and over again. And remember, this is not about doing the right thing for moral reasons. This is about being better. Okay. Now, because sometimes people also think that you don't agree with me because you didn't hear me. That's not always true. I can hear you, but I just disagree with you. But it's still important that you know that I heard you. It's always important that group members know that they are heard, and if they're having trouble being heard, I've found sometimes it's better to have one-on-one meetings rather than large group meetings. Or what I'll do is I will do, what I call sort of segmented attention. Instead of everybody talk, nope, we're gonna take turns and go around. Just so that everybody has the opportunity to be heard, because even if one person doesn't have the answer I need now, or we don't go their way, right? I'm still gonna need that person on my team willing to contribute later, and I can't shut them down now, otherwise I'm not gonna be able to access the ideas that they have later. Tools, as far as a leader, you wanna try and encourage contributions, like I say, you can do so like the selective attention. You create the safe spaces. One of the neat things to do is to validate the ideas, even if you don't end up using them afterwards. That's a good idea. That's a really good question. That's, affirming. If somebody gets skipped or talked over, you return back to them. Jill had a really good idea, right? Let's explore that again. And you have the ability to do that. And then you want to build this network of inclusivity. So it's not just one person. Everybody else realizes this, and they start practicing this because, hey, I'm going to go off and lead my own group someday, and I want that extra 50%. So let me practice it now. I don't have to wait for the boss to go ahead and say, hey, Jill's idea was pretty good, let me revisit it. Right? You can actually start doing that. Over time, you play the long game. Over time, that culture starts to set in. People expect that they belong. I'll tell you the other thing too, those who don't match that, right, they'll find their way out of that culture. You'll also find it's way easier to recruit people who want to be part of that culture. Once that starts to get out, now you're getting to your competitive advantage on recruiting. Right? The diversity now. So inclusivity, that's the first thing I think. You want to create the environment that makes it easier to bring people in. And I'll say it again, it is not for doing the right thing, it is straight up competitive play. Okay? How you go about creating a diverse environment, a little bit different. It's an investment of time. It's an investment of time. I'll say it again. Like many other investments, I'll put up Warren Buffett here. Warren Buffett, he's a very famous investor, and one of his key adages is buy and hold. You buy valued companies and you hold them for long periods of time. You don't do a lot of high volume trading. Same type of thing, because for creating diverse environments, it's time in the market. It's not timing the market. People that try and buy low and sell high always lose. People that sort of buy solid and hold that over time, even as you watch the stock market tank, you know, the fundamentals of the economy are still strong. You buy and hold, that's gonna come back over a 10, 20-year horizon. Right? You're playing the long game. A lot of times people come in, and I hate to say it, I've seen this, they're hired as the diversity person, and they're expected to change the entire face of the organization in what, 6 months, a year? I remember a very precocious undergraduate when I was interviewing for dean, you know, very full of themselves, says, hey, so if you're gonna be dean, what are you gonna do to solve systemic racism? And I'm like, yeah, but you know, I'm like, okay, that's really reasonable. If you're gonna do culture change, you have to be aware of the time scales. Again, using the engineering, I mean, people know what a time constant is. The time constant, decay rate, right, get to about 60 to 2/3 of your, you know, time constant on change for culture is about 10 years, 10, 15 years. All right, so that's a time scale you gotta be thinking about. Okay, it's not tomorrow. Other things that you do, because it takes so long, this is for the recruiting, finding people. Open your aperture and look over a long period of time. We were talking about this as lunch, you gotta search, you gotta look just in a specific, now, if you open up your aperture, both in terms of the areas that you wanna look across, as well as the time frame that you wanna look across. It doesn't have to be just right now, you're in the market looking for certain types of people, and you're gonna stay in that market for an extended period of time, you actually have the opportunity, a much better opportunity to find people. You wanna be flexible and cast a wide net, this is, again, you know, meat and potatoes, whatever, blocking and tackling, whatever analogy you wanna use. You look for people that have talent, you don't go ahead and shut out people that might fit your organization. Too restrictive, a search characteristic. The other thing too, I say, is recruiting is a contact sport. If you want to build a faculty that is going to be diverse, you can't do it sitting in your office. You can't do it just sending out ads. You actually have to get out and interface, and it's a contact sport. Build your contacts, track them over time, use friends of friends, networks of networks. I mean, how was I here? Right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's Ayana saying, hey, you know, exactly. You build those networks, you keep working them over time, they will bear fruit. It is still part of that time in the market, right? And I will tell you, as you're doing this, your current and former members of the organizations end up becoming excellent advocates. That's why the inclusivity piece really begets that diversity as you go forward. It's much easier to pull people in from other areas if they know that there is a good place for them to land. This is getting to the weeds a little bit, but it's nice to have a target. In any organization, if you want to change the culture and change the behavior of the organization, even if it's like a homework group or a lab section, the magic number is about 1/3. It's about at 1/3 that the majority population no longer sees the underrepresented population as unique, and the underrepresented population tends not to see themselves as an outlier. And there are a whole bunch of social psychology reasons for doing this. This is where it's really helpful to have a mom who is like a sociologist. And I won't belabor that. Hit equity, because I know we're coming up on time. Got a few slides left here. After you've established your inclusive culture and you've built a diverse organization, much like recruiting is a contact sport, maintaining an equitable environment it takes time and effort. Right? You have to actively manage it. This was a little bit more targeted at faculty building research groups, but I think the same thing will apply for any staff for faculty as well too. For faculty building research groups, part of the reason you have to actually nurture it because people move through the system and don't stay resident. Now equity, as we were talking about a little bit earlier today over lunch, to me it means providing those in your organization the means to maximize their potential. And here's one of the classic things that you'll see in terms of a description of equity versus equality. Equality means everybody has the same stool to stand on, right? It's equal. Right? But if somebody's shorter than somebody else, it doesn't necessarily give them the same opportunity. So treating a diverse set of talent the same isn't going to maximize the individual success potential. If you're able to go ahead and reorient your resources, you might be able to get a greater level of satisfaction by making sure they have similar outcomes, independent of their individual characteristics. Key to fostering equity is to listen. I say that as I'm up here talking, I understand that. But the ability to listen, it's an often underappreciated skill. For those of you who are thinking about going out and being successful in your chosen careers, the ability to use your ears more than your mouth is so important. Why? When you're talking, you can't learn anything. And the more you learn, again, that's your intel. That's your competitive advantage in the business world. Okay? So you gotta, as a leader, you're gonna have to listen. Maybe you might have to ask questions, poke people, to get an idea of what constitutes success for your personnel. Right? Don't assume your definition of success is the same as their definition of success. You actually have to find out what their definition of success is, and then know what they need to be successful. It sounds like work, right? That's why I say it's gonna take time. It takes effort. Right? People in your organizations are individuals, they should be treated as such. And then once you know what their needs are, then you, like a coach, you can apply the kinds of tools, techniques, the opportunities, whatever you want, to help them achieve and maximize their potential. Some people need a kick in the pants, right? Some people need a lot of support and guidance and encouragement. Some people, need a challenge. And once you realize, what makes them tick, then you can go ahead and provide them the opportunities to maximize their potential. Another key is building trust. Right? And this is where, as a leader, you want to be very, very consistent in how you approach decision making. You also, I think it's very effective to be honest, authentic, and open. I don't agree with you. I don't think you're performing to your potential. If I really don't think you're performing to your potential, it is not necessarily a criticism. It is, how do we get you to perform to your potential? And are there any things that are preventing you from doing that I can remove? Okay. This idea, we're running up on time now, of trust building, really, if you can spread that throughout your whole group. So it's not just hub and spoke, right? It's not just the leader of the group and everybody in the group trusts the leader. It's that the group learns to trust each other. Again, if I use that Warriors analogy, if I throw a pass, I know they're gonna be there. Because this is what we practice, and we've done this over and over again. Right? If I'm covering, hedging on a screen, I know somebody else is gonna be covering the corner for me. Okay? And then you start to build trust, which makes the overall group perform better. And one of the key things you have to do as a leader is have your organization understand that success is not zero sum. That's part of the trust. If your success goes up, that does not necessarily mean that mine goes down. Right? That feeds back into the inclusivity piece. We can all be successful. Okay? If you're in an environment where everybody feels that they're investing in the success of other people because they make the whole group look good, that's a group you want to be a part of. Right? And then you're going to put your effort in to make sure that you're not the slacker. And what ends up happening? 50%. Right? A key benefit here is if there's trust, you can make some hard decisions without impacting the inclusivity of the overall group. This is not about you. Right? If I'm going to make this decision and take resources away from you, it's got nothing to do with you actually. Right? This is about us. There's actually a virtuous cycle to this. If you start off in this toolbox, right? If you start off with the inclusivity, so everybody feels that they can belong, right? I think that begets sustainable diversity because it's easier to bring people in, right? Because they feel that there is a place for them. And that's why I think you can do the inclusivity before you do the diversification. A lot of people get it the other way around. Diversification, like investing, you got to do the long view. If you are an inclusive environment, it's easy to do diversity. If you're diverse and inclusive, right, Now you can actually start thinking about how do I maximize the potential of everybody in an equitable way, right? If everybody sees that, their opportunities are getting maximized and they can trust each other, right? Success is not zero sum, that then feeds back into the inclusivity. And you've got this positive sort of flywheel. It keeps going around and around and around and around. So I'll leave you with some conclusions. Last slide. I think that the inclusivity, diversity, equity are powerful tools. And I've seen it. I've seen it ordered 10 to the 1, I've seen it ordered 10 to the 2. Haven't yet seen it ordered 10 to the 2, 10 to the 4, right? But it's coming, exactly. I've been pretty right on my bet so far. This one's coming. Hopefully you've seen some of the examples of where if you apply it, I'll repeat again, not out of a sense of any moral obligation, right? But as a straight up competitive play, it is an advantage that you can use. I mean, there are many sort of, moral imperative advantages to it that are ancillary, right? But even if you don't care about that, right, it is a straight up competitive advantage if you are able to do it. Growing this type of activity in academic organizations, actually any type of organization is going to take leadership. I will say this, if you don't, that's fine. We're gonna. And then we'll see where you are and where we are at the end of the day. That is what I said to my colleagues when I was saying, well, this is why we really want, and the University of Illinois Mechanical Engineering, when I got there, I was the first. When I left, it was about 30% of our faculty were underrepresented. Because they realized, I may not believe Andrew, but I'm not gonna take the chance. Because it was a public institution and raises are public, right? And so once they started to say, holy crap, oh my goodness, okay. I'm gonna try, and I'll put in the plug here for the students. This is a great time to start exercising that muscle. Again, not as a moral imperative, but as a straight up competitive advantage from a business case. You're able to do this, you're gonna shine at the job interview. Right? You're gonna have a leg up on your competition when you land that job and go work for Medtronic or Boston Scientific or someplace like that, okay? How do I know this? Because, for example, one of the people on that mission inclusion, and this to you now, she was the CTO of Medtronic, right? And she was saying this is what she's looking for in people that are coming up behind her, and she will go in and pick those out. Right? So it's not just me, the faculty member, saying it, right? This is the person that's in charge of all tech for the biggest medical device company in the country. I'll leave it with that. Right? Any questions?
This was an excellent talk. The first that I've seen that combined all three, inclusivity, diversity, and equity. And also, I like the fact that you came at it with the systems engineering approach, and also the project management skills and all that stuff, sociology, all the stuff. So thank you very much. Any questions from the audience? Yes, please.
Hi, very cool talk.
Thank you.
So I'm a new faculty here. I was 5 years at a previous institution and it was really not good because I've been trying to do the inclusive part, right? Like bringing my department into this desire that I had of making students of color feeling more welcome in the major. And I faced a lot of resistance, right? In terms of, can we just set up specific advising for these students? So my question is, how do you get that inclusivity, in the face of opposition and, as an untenured faculty? Yeah.
I hear you. Okay, so
That's question one.
No, that is an awesome question. And again, because I'm hoping people can see this online, because again, I'm an engineer, so I have to use diagrams and figures. This is what I think I was showing somebody earlier.
Yeah, that was me.
Okay, you know, if this is on the belief in DEI scale, right? You're gonna have a section of your population that's out here, right? And that would be you, and probably many of you who have come to see this talk. You're also gonna have a section of the population that, you know, thinks this is not really worthwhile, it's a bunch of hooey. Interestingly enough, right, you've got this giant middle. And people on either side of that distribution may think that that giant middle is against them because they're not running headlong in the direction that the tails of the distribution are. It turns out that giant middle just doesn't care, right? Because there's nothing in it for them, right? If I go ahead and do this for you, is it gonna mean anything to me? No, it's not gonna mean anything to me. And so, to answer your question is, you have to figure out the value proposition, or the what's in it for me, or the selfish reason why somebody might wanna do this, okay? So, if you're at an institution that has very high tuition, and you're heavily tuition driven, okay, and you can demonstrate a correlation between retention and inclusivity, right? Based on some metric of inclusivity and a retention rate, and you can point to people that if you actually drop below this, you're sacrificing $2.5 million a year or whatever, draw the correlation. Even if people don't think that we have to do this for a moral good, they will say, okay, well, let me take a look at this because I don't wanna lose that $2.5 million a year. And that's the pathway you have to go through. And I can tell you, it wasn't straight and linear for me when I was doing this in my former life, and I don't think it'll be straightforward in my current life as a dean. It takes a little bit of time. This is why you need that long time constant to figure out, you know, what's the high leverage path that I can take that giant middle is going to care about. A lot of times in academia, it's prestige. Other times it's money. Those tend to be the two that move the needle more than anything else that I've seen in academia. You may have other ideas, but those are two that I can see.
Oh, there's a question on the chat.
Yes.
We want to read it for you.
Sure, go ahead.
I teach gender engineering and I agree with all your skills for having everyone heard. I have found that there can be a synergy of traditional individualistic competencies and more relational competencies of women and other represented groups. Fire preventers, systems thinkers, process focus. Angels advocate expanding ideas instead of poking holes in ideas, getting into the shoes of the customer or user, and looking from there. Have you identified competencies that your diverse teams bring to the table? Understanding different competencies increases listening and collective intelligence. So that's a question. Have you identified competencies that your diverse teams bring to the table?
So interestingly enough, sometimes embedded in that is that there is an assumption that the underrepresented populations have certain competencies that the majority population does not. Right? What I found is that when people are incentivized, selfishly incentivized, some of the competencies emerge. Right? One of the key things is empathy, understanding other people. Okay? One might think that, you know, people that have been in a difficult position before, underrepresented, might have a natural proclivity to be more empathetic than others. I would actually posit that that's not necessarily true. It is actually a matter of incentives. If it is your part of your job or part of your responsibility, and you're going to be rewarded for it or punished if you don't, I think people can build up that EQ skill pretty quickly. I've seen it happen. Favorite story about this is there was a faculty member who shall remain nameless who thought that, you know, affirmative action and all this stuff was absolute hogwash. and would just totally torpedo any female faculty candidate or giving scholarships to any underrepresented student, graduate or undergraduate. Long story short, a couple years before I left, I was looking through the graduate applications and I was seeing comments from the same faculty member that were saying, we have to female faculty member or person of color, we have to give this person our higher scholarship, otherwise they're gonna go to Michigan. Right? Because they understood now it was a competitive thing.
Yeah, it's competitive.
It was now in their selfish interests to try, because they had seen some of the data that we were showing them, and they then incorporated some of those affects and competencies that you're talking about. So I would, it's not directly an answer like these are some of the competencies. I think that's a longer answer to the person online. But I will say that if you can again align incentives, many of those actually span across a wide section of population.
Other questions? Yeah,
We'll come back there.
anybody else?
She had two.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. The first one is, would you say that a lot of the effort, the current effort toward DEI, or now I'm gonna call it IDE, it hindered because people tend to approach it from a moral perspective versus
Competitive
like,
advantage.
you kind of want people to be really want to do it because it's a nice thing to do and things like that. Like, how would you help shift that mentality? Because I founded this organization called the Alliance for the Black Community in higher ed, and I went all emotional. That was an emotional reaction to whatever. And now I'm trying to diversify, and so how do I switch that mentality and actually help the other people?
That giant middle is not going to be swayed by emotion.
I know.
Yeah, and you've got to think, what is your objective? If your objective is, about yourself, and not in a pejorative sense, about my identity and I want to have my identity represented, or do I actually want to shift a culture in an organization? Which one is more important to you, right? If you actually want to shift the culture in the organization, you may actually have to take your identity and put it a little bit behind. Doesn't mean forget who you are, it's just you're keeping your eye on the longer term goal, right? And then once you're able to take that emotion out of it, it depends on if they're an analytical organization. If they're a bunch of scientists and engineers, one of the things you can do, like when I put up that process flow, right? Once the rest of the faculty saw, oh, shit, this is just like a chemical engineering. Each of these are unit ops. Okay, I get that. Yeah, we can do this. All right, which one do we do first? Okay, which one do we do second? And then now it's just a process, right? There's no emotion to it, right? It's just now, how do we get the resources to each one of these? Right? And all the emotions are taken out. I'm actually working hard on that myself because there is another organization. There's an organization that got stood up during the pandemic and the George Floyd incident at Minnesota, and I'm trying to work with them to see how we can harness some of that emotion, which is very, very valuable, and get that channeled into something that is a lot more sustainable, systems oriented. Yeah. And so it becomes a process we do, and then working on that 10-year, 15-year time horizon to actually change a culture so everybody feels that this is a place they can come and do their best work. It is hard, right? Because sometimes I want to yell and scream too, but eye on the prize. Okay, what are we trying to do here? Don't know the details of yours, but again, I think if you could turn it into something that's a little bit more, of a process. It's almost like a and who's really, I was surprised. Some of the businesses that I worked with on doing this, the Cargill and Medtronics, they were actually far ahead of the academics. Right? In academia, when we do our year-end evaluations, it's usually on what you did. How many papers you published, how many courses you taught, what was your teaching evaluation, what were your scores. It's never on how you did it.
That's true.
You listen to other people, are you a good team player, a communicator? It is now standard practice in many of the Fortune 100 companies to have what you do and how you did it as part of equal parts of what goes into your raise pool. Right? So the people that think, well, I just got to do really, really well, screw everybody else, right? They're gonna be in for a surprise when they come out and try and work for Abbott or
Electronics.
Medtronic. I don't know what like the computer science sort of like bro culture is like
Apple.
in this area. It may be different. I mean, still may be just sort of on what you do. And a lot of the other organizations, they're doing both, and they have turned it straight up into like a process. There's certain boxes you gotta get evaluated on, and you can choose not to do it, or you can choose to do it, and there are incentives that align that behavior with sort of desired outcomes, and you can see sort of a shift in the organization.
Okay, any last question before we go to the reception? Go ahead, second.
So at some point you mentioned that we need to be honest and authentic in our interactions, right, as we implement this approach. My question has to do with dealing with students, right? Because we deal with undergraduate, and as much as they want to believe that they're grown up, there are still things that they're pretty immature about, right? And so there's this concept of professor talk where you will say something and then the student will misinterpret it, and apparently this new generation tend to be a bit more sensitive. What they say, like the cuddling of the American mind paper thing, this book. So how do you deal with that? Like this idea of I want to be honest, but I don't want the student to misinterpret what I'm saying. And then on top of that, you have people, minority people, who are saying, I'm tired of teaching about those things, right? And so in the big curve that you have, bringing those people in the middle, in addition to the getting the incentive, right, to tell them, hey, come do it. At some point you have to teach too about some of the things that they shouldn't do. So how do you navigate both of these? Sorry, I speak a lot with my hand.
Good question. That's a broad question.
Yeah.
And honestly, I mean, you can write theses on that. Yeah, it's a broad question, and if there was an easy answer, you'd have it on a fortune cookie or something like that. It'd be done. What I would advocate, based on my experience, is to pay attention to the order of operations. So, do I want to go ahead and educate? Because this is one of the things you get into in this whole space. Well, you got to do this, but no, you got to do this, and what about this, and what about these people, and what about that, and what about, and with all that stuff done, you don't get anywhere, right? Couple things. Remember what I said? I pick the fights I think I can win. I don't pick fights I don't think I can win, right? I'll stand down. I'll be diplomatic if I don't think I can win that one. The other one is, if you're going to take a beach, you don't take the whole beach at once, right? You look at any military strategy, you will focus your efforts, and that's why they call it a beachhead, right? And you will go ahead and take that beachhead, drive inland, and that's when you can spread out, okay? So in terms of order of operations, I would not try and educate. That I would try and get them to operate in their own selfish interests for their own reasons, right, to change behavior. After that, I believe many of them, well, first I think it'll be easier to educate because they'll see things that they wouldn't see otherwise, right? And many of them might actually choose to self-educate. But that's not the one I would fight first. That's going to be a tough one.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you so much. Excellent. Let me remind you, the next talk will be on January 26, 2023, and we will have another session like this. There's a refreshment outside. You can continue asking questions with our speaker if you want, and stay around and listen. Thank you for coming. I appreciate it.